Welcome back to the channel where this week we focus on our 1949 Chevy pickup. Today's jam-packed with a lot of cool stuff. We're working on the split bumper design on the rear of our Chevy truck, welding those together right now for that custom look. We're going to work on building interior panels, how to mount those panels with magnets. We're going to go over cutting old seat covers apart to make templates to make new seat covers out of our Apex leather. Go over some sewing machine basics, how to wind a bobbin, and using a double needle machine. All right, so Bob just got all the brackets TIG welded on so we can bolt the split bumper on there. Looks pretty cool. Looks really good with the stake pockets done. What you about to do now, Bobby?
I'm trying to figure out if we can make a cool looking roll pan for this thing and it'll all blend together.
It's gonna look nice, especially if we make it look like that.
That's the problem. That's a drawing.
That's the hard part. All right, so then what I'm working on, since Bob's back there working on the metal, I'm trying to get some of these interior panels done. So since this was already a built truck we did years ago, all these panels were already done. Now that we've changed it from a bench seat over to bucket seats, we've got to change some of these panels behind the seat. So I'm gonna cut some aluminum, see if we can get those panels made and start making these panels below the seat. I decided to go with MDF instead. I already had this laying around and it's perfect with what's already in the All right, so we've got the roll pan section. We're starting to make that right now. Started rolling that in the roller. We put a brake on it, and that's looking pretty good. We've had it sitting up there, so hopefully tomorrow we'll have that mocked up for good. So I made those two rear panels that I was just sanding on. What those panels are, they go behind the seats, and you can remove those to be able to access the battery and just some goodies that are back there, which go right here. There's the battery back here. So down low, there's also another panel that needs to go all the way across. So the upholstery shop that did this before basically built all this to go with that bench seat that was in there. So everything is in multiple pieces due to how they had to make it. So we've got this piece, that's one piece. We've got this piece that kind of wrapped, goes behind that piece and all that. So what we're gonna do instead is make this all one piece, hopefully. One thing that we've got to take into account is that we're foaming the floor and we're using a square weave carpet. So once we double stack 2/4 inches of foam and this carpet, we've got 5/8 of an inch. So we have to take that into consideration when we're building the panels that are going to go in there, because if you build them a little too long, then nothing fits. The reason we use the 2/4 inch square foams is we almost use that foam as like a filler, like you would on body filler. Because you can use that 1/4 inch foam and you can fill channels like this. You can block it flat, just like you would a filler. And then we'll double stack it and we'll kind of block that foam and we'll make it super smooth. And then the square weave will go on top of that, which we use Apex. This stuff's really awesome. This is not the color we're using, but I cut some test pieces because it never hurts. Is when you're building these, you can put all this in there, lay your panels on it. You can see that'll just kind of give you what you need, like when we go to make this lower panel on the seat. So I'm going to start figuring out some measurements to be able to make this one piece. We'll see if we can get that made and figure out how we're going to mount it in there. So with our first panel already built, just using templates from the old panels to make one piece, we've then sanded the edge just to kind of bevel that edge. It gives it a lot cleaner look when we go to wrap the panel. Then the next thing we're going to do is get the seat out of the cab, get everything moved so we can get in there and work on these panels. Once we start test fitting it, we're going to measure and make the marks. We're just going to use a Sharpie mark, and what we're doing now is we're going to use an 1/8" bit from our magnet kit, and we're going to drill a hole through our new panel and the old piece of wood. And we're making these holes roughly 6 to 8 inches apart. Next, we're using the magnet bit from the kit. It's got a little shoulder on it, so you'll drill it the depth of the shoulder, and that's precisely the width of the magnet, so they'll sit flush. We're going to do this on each one of these holes. All right, so we've got our holes drilled for our magnet. So these magnets are normally a really tight fit. So for Mobile Solutions, you can get one of these kits. Has all the bits you need to be able to insert the magnets. Works really good. Now, even though they're a pretty tight fit, what I typically do is take a little bit of panel bond or something, and I'll just put a dab in there just to make sure that they're going to stay in there. But typically, if you do it right, you've got to beat them in there. So we got them in, all looks really good. You can see they're nice and flush. So when we go to put this thing in, it'll just snap into place, super easy. So that panel bond takes a little while to cure. So while that's curing, we'll start on that other panel. Now we're going to work on making panels for the rear of these seats. So what I'm using for a template is a clear vinyl. This is what you would use in a convertible top rear window. You can get this in a roll. It's super easy because you can see through it. So if you have to work around any obstructions, brackets, anything like that, you know exactly where you need to make your marks. We're using tailoring pins to hold it in place. You can get this at pretty much any upholstery supply shop. Really easy way to make a template. So we've made good progress on the 49 so far today. We've got the rear end, a lot's done on that. We've got the bumpers bolted into place. We've got the roll pan shaped. We've got the brakes top and bottom on the roll pan. We've got the license plate box roughed in, and we're getting a good look at it. It's gonna look really cool. A lot of work still left to do. So now what I'm doing, since we have the seats out, I'm working on those. Now what we're using in this truck is Ultima seats. I really like these seats. They're a short seat without the headrest. They're big bolstered, so they already have a custom look when you put a cover on them. We could have built custom seats for this, which it really deserves it, but we just don't have the time with the deadline we're trying to make. So these are gonna look really cool once we design a cover and get them wrapped. So the way I'm doing this, it's gonna help us to do a few different things. It's gonna make it a little easier to cover it. It's gonna help to give us a little bit of wiggle room for how tight we can pull the cover to get any wrinkles out or anything like that. And it's gonna look pretty cool. Seeing it's a truck, what I'm talking about is we're actually building a back panel for this. Now this back panel can just pop off, so we can wrap this in leather, we can wrap it in carpet. The only time you'll see it is when the seat leans forward, and with these being power seats, they don't even lean far enough forward that you're really even gonna be able to see it. But there is a power motor right inside of here, and you can pop this cover off just like that and get right in there to the motor. So that's what I've been sanding on to get them on the passenger seat. Driver's seat's already done. We cut away the foam in the back. We started shaping the foam. So this outer panel, when it pops into place, it's gonna pop in where the foam is starting to bevel in, and it's gonna give it a nice tapered look into this piece. So we're gonna continue working on that. I've got the design roughly laid out on the seat with what I think I like. I'm gonna look at that a little more. We're gonna keep on these. I'm gonna shape the foam on the other seat, see if I can get the panels on it, and then we're pretty much ready to break them down and start making seat covers, which I hope we get to in this video because I'm really excited to do, but I know I have to get over and try to help out with getting the rear end of that truck done too. So let's just keep at it. We'll see where we get. Making good progress though, good progress. Pot it. We don't need no pot it. There's nothing in the pot it. I don't plan to put anything in the pot it. That'll be all. All right, so now that we've got these made, we've got them sanded, looking good around through there. This will get foamed and leathered or the type of carpet we're using. That way when we just pull it off. So how this will work is we can just snap this panel off. Now this board is actually a mounted fixed board, so we can use this to staple or glue our seat cover to. That way we can really play around with getting the seat cover tight, and then this will go back over the top of that and be covered. So just a really clean look, simplifies it a lot having to build the seat covers. Always turns out really nice, so I like doing it that way, especially in a truck. In a car, we probably wouldn't do that because you got people in the back and you do a full seat cover there. But anyway, it's looking pretty good. We're going to keep going. I think we're at a point of breaking the seats down. So another thing that I've done is we're going to use a lot of this as templates. We're not going to mimic the same cover, obviously. We're going to have some design. So the owner had some input on what he wanted to see. So you can see here I've got a line that's running down there, a line that's running down there. So this section's going to end up having a red piece that goes like that. We're going to eliminate this pleat going across, so this will be one solid piece. I think we're going to eliminate this strip and have that as one piece, but you can see I've got these marks all through here. Now those are our witness marks. When we cut this seat cover apart, we go back and we notch all of these spots, and that tells us where to sew it back together. So I went ahead, I've made marks on everything, I've labeled really well what everything is. That way when we cut this apart and we start making template, we shouldn't get anything mixed up. I think we're ready to start taking it apart. We could go ahead and start covering the side covers where the power buttons are. Yeah. All right, so we've got the seat cover for the backrest all removed. Here's the foam we're working with. Now these were fairly new seats, so no wear in them. They look really nice. Now, one thing I do like about these seats that's already there that we do kind of in this custom interior is they Velcro in along this channel. So that's a really nice, easy way to do it and get a real nice tuck in there. Here, in the center section, it's still hog ringed, but we may do a Velcro in there as well. So we're gonna get this bottom seat cover off, and then we can start cutting this seat cover apart. I'll show you how we do that, start making all of our patterns that we've kind of drawn out on here. So most of these modern covers, they're held on with what's called a J molding. So at the bottom, you can see this piece of plastic shaped like a J. What it does, it lips over, catches a piece of metal, and just snaps into place. So pretty easy to get off, pretty easy to get back on. now we can start making our alignment marks. What I'm using for this is just a Sharpie, since we're going to cut it apart. Basically all this is going to be garbage after we're through. So we're going to go through about every 3 or 4 inches on every seam that's sewn together and make a mark. This is probably the most critical part of this whole process. After making our alignment marks and taking a few pictures, because you never know, it might be a couple of weeks before you come back to it, we're going to cut each one of these pieces of the seat apart. So we're going to go through with a really sharp razor blade and cut each thread. They also have seam rippers you can use that work really well, but this is the process I like to use. So I've jumped ahead just a little bit. This is a deadline build. It's been actually a few days since I've turned the camera on, so I'm not sure where I left off here. But I have laid all the templates out for the seats that we cut apart. So we're cutting that out of the Apex leather. So this is all the bottom portion of the seat. We're going to cut that out, and then we're going to sew foam all of that and run a border stitch on the outside of that. But I already have the backrest done. I went ahead and just jumped ahead and did that because I wanted to see what it would all look like, but I've just sat this one into the truck. It's still got to sit outside, get a little heat on it, but looking good so far. We got the insert in here like the owner wanted to see, so all that's looking good. We'll see if we can get this bottom part finished up. Maybe we can do the 2 cushions today, get the seats together, fit them over in the truck and see what it looks like. Hopefully the sun's going to come out soon where I can set these out in the heat. The leather, you don't really want to steam it because it can discolor the leather. It can dry it out and it kind of changes the color of it. So if you set them out in the sun, let them sit out there for a day or two. They really tighten up. So if you've got any small wrinkles, they'll normally come out of it. And those are pretty tight, but they've got a couple of little spots in them. Should pull out when the heat gets on it. So let's keep on these cushions, see how far we can get. Now that the pieces are cut, we can cut some foam. Now this is sew foam. We're going to talk about foams in just a second. All we want to do is lay the pieces out on the foam and then cut a little extra. I normally do a couple of inches just to have plenty of wiggle room. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna run a border stitch around every one of these pieces right along the edge. That thread is gonna lock this piece down to the sew foam. You obviously won't see any of that stitching. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can just sew it straight to the foam and just let it float, or you can use a temp tack or some sort of glue to kind of hold it down for you. So I've glued these, but the way I look at that is if this makes sense, you don't want to glue the pieces to the foam. When you glue to sew foam, if you use like our upholstery glue I showed at the front of this video, and you're really locking that down together, that sew foam is so open that the glue later on, you can print it with your finger. It tries to stick together. It doesn't work real good, so you really want the pieces of leather to kind of float on the foam. So I'll use just a light temp tack just to hold it in place long enough while I run that border stitch. It's not actually, the glue's not actually locking it down, if that makes sense. So what we're gonna do now is start running all these border stitches. We've got, I don't know, probably 25, 30 pieces here to do. Once we do that, we can trim away the foam. So there's a difference in sew foam and closed cell foam. Those are typically the two types of foam you're gonna use in upholstery. The closed cell foam, I think we talked about, that's going to be like for your door panels and consoles and stuff like that. It's harder. You can actually sand it. You can use it almost like a filler, really. On the sew foam, it's got a backing. I know that's probably really hard to see, but it's what's called like a t-shirt backing. That's what actually catches the thread and locks the thread into place. If it did not have that t-shirt backing, the thread would pull right out. That's the reason you can't sew onto the closed cell foam like you would use on a door panel. If you sewed to that, the stitch just pulls right through it. The needle will just cut it. So that's why we use sew foam when we sew. Also called scrim foam. Okay, time to start stitching. All right, so when we do this border stitch, we're trying to get it on the very edge. So I'm basically taking our foot, the center foot, putting it right on the edge of the leather, and we're just following that all the way down. All right, so now what we'll do, we'll cut away the excess foam, keeping our scissors, a little bit of an angle inward toward the leather. That'll make it thin right on the edge, so when we go to sew the pieces together, it won't be so much for the machine to try to go through. All right, now one of the most important parts, we've got all of our little witness marks that are gonna help line these pieces up that we made before we cut our old cover apart. So what we're gonna do now is each one of these marks, we're gonna fold the material into a bend, take our scissors, snip out just the end of it. So now when we go to sew this together, we've got all these little cutouts, and those will be our alignment marks so we know we're lined up as we're sewing this thing together. All right, ready to sew together. A lot of pieces to sew together, takes a minute, take your time, and it'll all work out just fine. So, okay, there is an order you want to sew this together, so keep up with it when you cut your seat cover apart if you're not tailoring it from scratch. You tailor it from scratch, you'll have a feel, you'll know how it's going to sew back together. What we're going to start with is our center section. So this is the center design. These little wings will sew onto that. So we'll basically sew the whole center together first. We'll get that whole length, then we'll do the same thing with our sides. We'll get that whole length, and then we'll take our sides and our center, we'll sew those together. You'll kind of see how this process goes. This is where those alignment marks, those little darts we cut, they're really going to come into play. So you want to keep those lined up. Now, even though this is how this goes together, you're going to sew everything face to face. That means we have the face of our red leather, we have the face of our gray Apex leather. They're going to go face to face together, end to end. Line up your marks that we've cut, and then we're going to sink the needle and start stitching. So another thing you want to know is the seam allowance. So on most of these seats that I do, I have 3/8 seam allowance. Sometimes I'll go to 1/2 inch if I'm tailoring a seat, but 3/8 is your typical seam allowance. If you cut a seat apart, that's what you're going to see typically. Now, what a seam allowance is when we sink the needle in this material and we start stitching, we're actually stitching 3/8 over from the edge of the material. So what we have left between the stitch and the edge of the leather is 3/8 of an inch, and that's your seam allowance. Now what that's going to do is once we sew it together, which I'll show you in a second, it's going to leave the seam allowance, the little flaps in the back. So when you go to sink a needle or a double stitch for a French seam or anything like that, you're going to sew through that as well. Really locks that stitch together. Makes it really strong too. We also have seam tape. I really like this stuff a lot. I'll show that to you when we use the double needle. But all right, let's put them together. Let's sink this needle. Make a seat. Now, one thing that can make it really easy for you, because you are trying to keep that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance through every piece that you sew, is having a seam allowance guide. So basically what this is, a little plate right here, bolts onto the back of your machine, and this won't allow our material to go any further than 3/8 of an inch. So we're basically going to butt our edge up to that plate, and we'll be able to just follow that all the way through and keep that 3/8 allowance. Got a different one on my Juki that's got a little roller wheel on it. I like that one too, but you can lay down a piece of tape if you don't have one of these. You can also see I've got a Sharpie mark in there for 3/8 of an inch that you can follow. But this makes it really easy because once you can butt that material up to it, it can't go past it. So you're going to stay on 3/8. All right, so we're going to go end to end right here. We've got our first alignment mark right there. You can see those two are lining up together nicely. So we're going to push this in here under the machine. Got our 3/8 looking pretty good. Drop that foot, hold our thread back, sink our needle, boom, we got it. All right, so we are ready to sew. The first thing I like to do on all of these pieces is take a couple of stitches forward. Let's go a few back, forward. Sometimes I might do it a couple of times. What that's doing is that's a lock stitch. So that's locking that stitch together where it can't come back apart. And once we've done that, we can run with it. You see those marks right there, lining up just right. So we're going to keep these as flush as we can. Just keep it butted up against our seam allowance guide. At the end, we're going to back it up, do another lock stitch. Lift the foot, pull it out, and that's what we've got. right, so for any of you guys that aren't upholstery guys that don't know, if you are upholstery guy, you already know. But we've got a bobbin under here, and this is a bobbin, and the bobbin goes into the bobbin case. Now, when the thread comes off the stand, through the machine, through the needle, goes down, goes around, hooks onto the bobbin thread, to make a long story short, makes a little knot, and they come up, and that's what makes a stitch. So when we're doing a color like a gray or whatever, I wind my own bobbins. When it's black or something, I'll keep a box of black. They're little, let's see, they're little pre-made bobbins that you can just drop in there and they're ready to go. Like I said, when I've got a color, I'll just wind it up. So since we're here, I'll show you how to wind one. Okay, so I'll show you how this works. I just did one because my camera wasn't rolling. All right, so quickly, this is how this works. We're looking at the side of the sewing machine right here. So the way the sewing machine actually works and moves and gets power is there's a pulley right here that has a drive belt on it, just like the accessory drive on the front of the car. That belt is going down to the bottom of the machine where there's a motor. So when we hit the foot pedal, this motor turns and then it turns the machine. Also on the side of the machine is where we wind the bobbin. Now, different machines can be different. Some of them, my Juki has it on the front, this one's on the side. So what happens is we take the thread out of the machine, we loop it down through this little guy here, through the eye, and then right here on this shaft, that's where our bobbin goes. So we'll take our thread, and through the bottom of this bobbin, we'll push it through that hole and just pull a little tension on that. Now, the way this works is we've got a lever right here. When we flip this lever, you'll see this pulley. It goes into the belt. So now, when we hit the pedal, we're able to spin that pulley and we start to wind the bobbin. So I'll just hold tension on this thread we pulled out a little bit. It'll end up breaking off. Now you'll see that little arm right below that bobbin. Now when this thing starts to get full, it'll push pressure down on that arm and it'll release. There we go. Just a little snippy-doo there. Okay, now we've got to get the bobbin back in and we've got to get the machine to pick up the bobbin thread. Since we're here, why not show you how to do that too? All right, so it is important how the bobbin goes into the bobbin case. So if we're looking, let's say we're looking at the top of the bobbin and we've got the thread on the top of the bobbin. You can see on the case there's a little, it's hard to focus on this, there's a little slit right there and that's where that thread's going to go through. So we want to drop it in and we want to slide it into that slot and hook the thread into that arm. Now the thread in the top of the bobbin needs to be going to the right. If you do it to the left, it won't stitch right. And we'll just stick it back into the bottom of the machine. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's only one way it can really go. All right, so now that we've got the thread back through the machine, one trick you can do, if you've already got a threaded machine, you don't want to rethread it, you can tie a knot up here into the existing string with your new string and then just pull it through the machine. I've threaded this thing so many times I can actually do it quicker than I can go up there and tie the knot. So now that we're back down through the needle, the way we're going to pick up that bobbin thread is we're going to pull tension on the thread from our needle. We're going to hand wheel the machine slowly. Now as that needle starts to come back up, whoop, there's that bobbin thread. ready to go. Now, I could probably do an hour-long thing just on a sewing machine, threading machine, using the machine. That's not really what all this is about, but since we got into it, showed a little bit. So if you got any questions, you want to see more of that, up close detail stuff, not a problem. Just ask the question. So now we've got a couple of these side pieces sewn together. There's one more piece to go on here, but each of them are going to get a double stitch right down that seam. That's called a French seam. So like we talked about a little earlier, when you do that, we're going to use our double needle machine, and since it's 2 stitches, this is our seam allowance. We've got our stitch down through here. This overhangs our seam allowance, so when we go to sew the double stitch, it'll come through the material and hook into each one of the seam allowances. Now you have to hold that open, obviously, when you're sewing it so that it will go through them. One thing that I like to do is this seam allowance tape. Works really well. Just cut us a big piece of this. So, as opposed to having to fight with this seam to keep it open, we can take our seam tape, open up the seam, and this will keep it open for us. It'll also help that if our stitch misses the seam allowance, it'll go through the tape, which also helps to hold the stitch, so it just makes it just a good insurance. But I like this stuff because I have had it where you're trying to keep the seam open, and normally it works out pretty well, but if you're not paying attention, you can have both of these seams fold over to one side to double stitch it, and it gives you a really funny looking spot on this side of your material. So this is just a good way to know that that's not going to happen. So this is our NC double needle. Got this awesome little foot right here that has this guide right in the middle, and what that's going to do is just ride right in that seam, help to get a really straight stitch. All right, so got a lot done in between. Seats are finished up, everything's put together. I've even started just a simple console that's going to waterfall down the back of the cab, stop in the front of the seats where we're going to panel all the seats. Now, we're under a pretty harsh deadline, so we were just going to panel the sides of the seats in there, but, you know, by the time we do that, why not go ahead and build a console too? So we're working on that now. I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Everything turned out pretty good. Not only that, check out that rear end. So we've got the split bumper all finished up. Bumpers are ready to go to chrome. We've got the stake pockets all welded in. Teardrops are finished up. We fabbed up the roll pan. We've got the license plate box. The only thing we're waiting on are the tail lights that we've got going in here. So once we get those, we can finish that up. We've got to fully weld in the roll pan. And then the back end of the truck is done. What we have left to do is we have to finish the bottom lips of the new inner fenders inside the truck. Once we finish those, most of the metalwork, I believe, is finished up. We've got a roll pan style panel for the front grille. It doesn't fit very good, aftermarket piece. Taking a little shortcut since we're fabbing so much stuff. Like I said, big deadline. So I've got to make that fit now. Probably would have been quicker just to build the piece. But anyway, everything's looking good. It's coming together. Hope you guys enjoyed this. We're knocking a lot of stuff out real quick. Sorry I'm not catching every single second of it, but I'm under such a rush. Man, it's hard to just keep picking up the camera and doing it, but try to do better on the next one. We're going to pick this next one up with hopefully finishing up this console. And you know, I'm hoping getting into bodywork and start to get this thing ready for paint. So anyway, catch you guys next time.